I think, okay, there we go. So, um, I'd like to ask both of you, could you talk a little bit about some memorable aspect of your young adulthood and also the transition to young adulthood, um, maybe after being a student, or how your path developed as a young adult, and also if your disabilities affected your path and your decisions. I know that's kind of a lot of questions at once, but that's the basic idea.
Um, uh, I can start sharing. Um, I was born with a physical disability with muscular weaknesses. I was born and raised in Hong Kong, and most of the mosques in Hong Kong, are not fully accessible. But my parents would somehow still take me to the mosques and have me participate with like activities for children or even youth camp. So I was pretty much exposed from the get-go. I remember trying to climb the stairs of the mosque as a 4-year-old, and I didn't really think much about the stairs at the time. I was just so happy to be there and to participate. Um, and as I grew up, I realized that there were many assumptions towards disability, and that naturally increased my frustration as to why there were many assumptions or why there were stairs at the mosque. Why can't it be more accessible? I mean, as I grew up, I had more questions. It just came naturally. So sometimes I would find it hard to participate, that I would enjoy going to the library that was within the mosque just to read. I found that as my safe space. And our local imam, which he was from the Chinese Muslim community, he would sometimes take his breaks at the library. And he, by chance, was a parent of a child with a disability. So he had a daughter with Down syndrome, which was a blessing because I had a community leader that understood disability because he was a parent. And he would let me ask any questions that I had. Sometimes he just wanted to be alone, but his wife would be there and say, just answer her questions. So I had the safe environment to ask anything that I wanted to on faith, on life, on disability. And I think that helped develop confidence um, within me early on. Um, but when I was at university, at Hong Kong University, the venue was more accessible. So I was more able to be more involved with community events, especially under the Muslim Students Association on campus. So I discovered this activism side of me when I was a student at university. But when I graduated, um, I faced physical barriers again. But that's when I got into writing more and I started to get active online more. So my journey kind of evolved, and after becoming more involved when it comes to talking about disability, I ended up advocating on it more, so I would have to go out. Despite there being barriers, I ended up having the book launch at the mosque, the same mosque that I was struggle going up the stairs. So my my journey kind of evolved with time, with many different layers. But I think I recognize that there's a need to address that there are barriers that we should remove, and that there are assumptions that we shouldn't have, and how to make our communities more inclusive so it's easier to participate in our communities.
Wow, that's quite a journey that you've had. So always in Hong Kong, you've been.
Yeah. Yes.
And just one quick follow-up and then I'll let you speak, Rabbi Lauren. But I'm curious, so would you say that it's improved now that you are an adult compared to when you were younger? The inclusion in the mosques or in the general society?
At least the topic of disability was brought up. Because I remember when I was a child, I would only talk about disability with Imam or my parents when we were in a room, not within the community setting. There were no talks on disability or disability and Islam. After we started the community care and Islam initiative, we addressed the topic of disability in Islam openly, and I requested the Imam, even the Mufti of Hong Kong, who by chance is a parent of a child with a disability as well, to talk about the subject. You know, have sermons on the subject. This topic should not be hidden. It should be brought out. So I think at least there's more awareness in the sense that this topic was neglected for a very long time. I don't think the community is ready to address the physical barriers, but they're ready to at least acknowledge that there are physical barriers and it shouldn't be there, or that there are misconceptions and it's not okay to have these misconceptions. So I think there has been improvement in that sense.
So more the awareness or the education is better, but some of the actual accessibility issues are still there.
Yes.
Thank you. Rabbi Lauren, would you like to talk a little about your young adulthood experience or aspects of that?
Yeah, again, thank you so much for having me today. I am so honored to be part of this webinar. I'm going to spend a little bit of my time talking about my collegiate and my graduate school years around religious community accessibility. So, I would say that I'm very, very fortunate that I come from a family that really did whatever they could to try to make things more accessible for me as a blind woman. And that doesn't always translate, to the wider world. So I went to a very small college, a very small liberal arts college, and really started embracing my Judaism there. Our Jewish student building was not most accessible. I spent a lot of time I spent a lot of time in that building, but there were not a lot of accessibility features either there or in the rest of campus. I've heard recently that that's changed. Very glad to hear that. And I really knew, at that time that I wanted to become more involved in disability issues, particularly in the Jewish community, but also thinking broadly across all different kinds of religious traditions because my experiences were that I really wanted to be part of the community. And it was also really hard sometimes to navigate the reality of the kind of understanding of Torah and Jewish tradition that I have when the barriers to access were still there. So I was very, very, very involved in my community in college, very grateful for that. It really was foundational. And from there, I actually went and got a master's degree at the Jewish Theological Seminary, where I ultimately also was ordained many years later. And when I was there, I really started getting involved in the Jewish community on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, started becoming more religiously observant, and in that process began to recognize the ways in which disability access sometimes was present and often wasn't. And one of the many ways that that showed up for me was around text access, because I was working primarily with Hebrew text. And though I'm very lucky that there is a program called Duxbury that is a program that will create Braille versions of files that are imported into it. And I have a Braille printer. It's actually technically called an embosser, but I often call it a printer just for ease of understanding. So I had that available to me, which was a game changer. But there weren't a lot of supports for creating Braille content. So I had to do a lot of that on my own, which is why I mentioned being grateful for having the embosser. Um, and that has started to shift in terms of things getting better. There are particular organizations that serve blind and visually impaired Jews, and they're doing better work than they did even a decade and a half ago. But when I was really starting out in my studies, it was particularly difficult because I ended up having to create most of my own library. So I want to just kind of invite folks to kind of sit with that for a second, sit with the reality that I had to spend a lot of time creating my own library because that did not exist. And so that, of course, was a tremendous barrier to feelings of belonging in the community. And that really was a large impetus for why I then started working as hard as I did in terms of activism. Um, I also think it's really important that, and I want to kind of say a few words about this as well, that when I was in graduate school and really thinking about becoming a rabbi, although at that point I was getting a master's degree, um, I was very interested also not only in thinking about communal inclusion, but also when thinking about how Jewish tradition and how Torah can support the inclusion of people with disabilities. I really believe that it's a religious mandate, that it's not the nice thing to do, but it's actually a religious mandate. And I feel really grateful to be part of a growing field of people who are doing work in Jewish disability theology. And that feels really exciting to me. But at the time when I was really starting out on this journey, a lot of that work was just beginning. We certainly a degree of awareness around disability, and there was, there were definitely leaders with disabilities kind of sprinkled about. But I would say, really, in the last 15 years, things have undergone tremendous shift. We also, in 2009, there was a woman in Minnesota who launched something called the Jewish Disability Awareness, Acceptance, and Inclusion Month, which happens in February and really was a time for the community to be thinking broadly, not only about physical barriers to access, but also to attitudinal barriers to access, as well as barriers to accessing Jewish literacy. And that initiative continues, and I participate in it quite frequently every year. And also, in addition to that, I'm really interested in making this a year-round endeavor. And I am really fortunate that since my, beginnings in college and graduate school, there has been really a beginning of a sea change around thinking broadly about disability and creating more accommodating and accessible spaces. I will say there is a long way to go. And one of the things that I am particularly aware of, particularly around young adult inclusion and belonging, is that because we know the disability community is so diverse and our needs are so diverse, there are lots of different ways in which people's needs are and are not being met in physical and in virtual spaces, as well as in how we think about Torah and how that applies to our lives and how we relate to people from much more of a religiously oriented perspective. So all of those things I think are really, really key. But the fundamental thing, and I should have said this up front, is that everything I do is really rooted in the one of the very first teachings found in the Torah that all human beings are created b'tselem Elohim in the image of God, that every single person has divine spark within, every single person is inherently equal and dignified. And I often say to folks that this is the bedrock of all the work that I do. And it's an aspirational idea because we know that in the world as it is, we are not living up to that ideal. And I often want to invite people to imagine what would the world be like if actually we all deeply embraced the truth that we have this spark of the divine within us and that we are partners with God in creating the world in a way that allows all of us to thrive. And so that's a little bit about my journey and kind of where I'm at now.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Lauren. Obviously, you've done many, many things, and I just wanted to mention that Saul has joined us. So welcome, Saul.
Thank you. Sorry I'm late. We had some other meetings going on. last minute, and so I'm late. Sorry.
No problem. Would you like to uh, jump in? And we were just talking about Sadia and Lauren were giving
Sure.
a short overview of their young adult life and journey. So if the or um, kind of important aspects of that, if you'd like to share a little bit,
Sure. Well, I'm not really considered a young adult, but it's okay. Um,
or
I
what
work
you
at
remember, what you remember.
yes, I work at Senior Life Midland, and I have been here for 31 years. And I was diagnosed with cerebral palsy. Um, so I'm in a wheelchair and have never walked, but uh, my immense faith in God, not to mention that I have amazing parents. And the center where I grew up at was called the Cerebral Palsy Center. Now it's called the Children's Rehabilitation Center. They were the group or the individuals that worked there, from therapists to other staff members, that prepared me for life in general, as going out in the world in a wheelchair and dealing with um, barriers in life that we all go through, regardless of the disability that we face. Um, Mostly, I say that I have been very blessed, not to mention that because I've had great people that have supported me. Not everyone is this fortunate to have that. Um, yes, I did face a lot of adversity. I was one of the very first physically disabled youth back in those years that was mainstreamed into the public school setting. At that time, there were not many individuals with disabilities in the public schools. So my first day was an extremely bad and rough day, as a majority of the kids laughed, they pointed, they murmured behind me. I was not welcomed. Uh, but I did not let it deter me, even though it was incredibly brutal at the time. I just prayed in my faith in God. And I'll tell you a quick little story because I don't want to take too much time. But the way that I got around things was that I rolled in my wheelchair. I didn't have a power chair then, to a basketball court. And I picked up a ball and I pitched it over my head. I was not strong enough to shoot the ball normally, like a normal individual, that, a jump shot or whatever. And little by little, one of the kids, "You play basketball?" I said, "I do today." He goes, "Well, you shoot funny." I said, "Well, that's the only way I can do that." So then he started throwing it over his head like that. And next thing I know, another kid, another kid. Before I knew it, there must have been a dozen kids all around me, playing, giggling, and just having a great time shooting the ball. At that time, I was accepted by those kids. And from then on, I did not have any more issues. Yes, here and there, some people would stare and would do these things, but it kind of broke the ice going forward. And so from then on, sports became one of my most passions in life, uh, as well as working out. I do lift weights as well. And I just want to do as many things as possible in life for not only myself, but for others that view me. You don't know how many compliments I get from people. "Oh, you motivate me to do this. You motivate me to do that." And I'm glad I'm able to do that uh, through my work and my uh, other things I like to do. So that gives you a little bit about me there.
I love that you shared that kind of story. And um, I was thinking also, especially, you know, as we're growing up or, during childhood and teenage years and young adults and adults, it's, there's challenges about all the different stages, but I'm wondering if any of you can reflect on, what are the challenges of the young adult period in general, and did did your faith and the faith community help with those challenges, either socially, spiritually, if you're coming into adulthood, there's not necessarily like the friends that you had in school. There's not necessarily, a path, a, a direct path. You have to figure out a lot of things. So,
Yes.
um, that's a question that I was wanting to ask all of you. Yeah, what are some of those challenges, and did your faith and your religious communities help in what way?
I can answer. There are challenges, like besides the physical challenge of getting to one place to another, the challenge of actually talking about disability because most are not familiar and some feel uncomfortable because our society isn't designed in a way to be inclusive in terms of the buildings and things being accessible. So for some, it might be easier to exclude than to include. And when you're a child, you notice these things and you're mostly confused that why are things the way they are? And you ask your parents this, and sometimes your parents, they try their best to answer, but they don't have all of the answers, right? So the way that my parents would try to solve this was to introduce books, especially books on the stories of the prophet, and to show me that, the prophets, they were physically strong, but some of them were ostracized, so it's not just you. I mean, they try to like show me that this is a reality that all human beings will face. Yes, people with disabilities might face it more severely, but we're meant to learn from the chosen examples before us, like the prophets, on how we should cope, how we should grow, and not complain. Yes, we have the right to complain, but not complain all the time. Um, Rather turn to God, feel grateful for what we have. Like, for example, when I was at the hospital, my parents would have to come back home. So I would be alone at the hospital at night sometimes. And I remember complaining to my mom that, oh, why do you have to go home? And why can't I go home? And why is life this way? But my mom would remind me that, you know, at least you get to see me the next day. Like, focus on that, be grateful for that. And that's a blessing. And you mentioned how Prophet Joseph was separated from his father for a long time. And did he, I mean, how did he cope? So she left me with a book just to read and reflect and try to understand. And that inspired me from a young age. And rather, from that experience, I made that promise that, oh, one day I want to write a book on the stories of the prophets and how to derive strength. And that's how the book Strength from Within came about. That's the promise that I made as an 8-year-old to do one day. So I think introducing faith figures, especially in scriptures, um, is a way to explain to children what they're going through or how they should navigate their emotions and how they should cope or how they should complain. Because we should complain, but in a constructive way. So I think that is what helped me. And when you feel confident with your identity, you will automatically try to contribute within the community, despite the barriers, and the right people will come to you eventually, and you have to trust that. So life gets easier when that happens.
Wow. So it seems you were able to adapt and in just in terms of your social life and aspect, and then I'll pass to Rabbi Lauren. But was it easy to make friends, even in Hong Kong, or were most of your friends from the mosque or from school, or afterwards, like you grew up with people? Yeah, how did that work?
My circumstance was a little bit different in the Muslim community in the sense, not only because I had a disability and I still have a disability, but because I went to an international school when most of the Muslim kids went to a local school. So we had a very different schooling system. So I thought, are they uncomfortable around me because of the school I went to? I wasn't sure what was going on. But as I grew up, I realized because they had no exposure to disability, they didn't know how to talk about disability, and it wasn't really their fault. And some community leaders, they were also not aware how to talk about disability. I was blessed to have an imam who was a parent of a child with a disability, and that environment helped me grow. And I did kind of have a cultural shock after realizing that not all leaders are like that. Some are hearing about disability for the first time, and you have to explain, which can be really hard, especially if you're young, to explain to someone of authority um, of what disability is about. That can be really hard. But yeah, there are challenges, but it does get easier with time.
Hmm. Well, that's encouraging to hear.
Yeah.
Um, Rabbi Lauren, have you encountered challenges, socially or in the Jewish communities or the synagogues, or, either positive or negative or all of that?
Yeah, so thank you so much for the question. I actually really want to pick up on something that Sadia said, which is um, I certainly encountered a lot of challenges socially. When I started college, that's really when I felt a lot more freedom to like find my own group that I gelled with more. I mean, I know that I'm not the only person who didn't kind of, I had friends in high school, but it was a complicated time for a lot of reasons. And so, being able to be an undergraduate and find my path was really supportive for me. And I've been very lucky that I've been able to find and cultivate a lot of really beautiful friendships. I feel very blessed in that way. Um, and there also are a lot of challenges. There are a lot of challenges, I think, especially, finding your way in. Some communities can be a little bit harder to find one's way into. And certainly finding the right spiritual home is really important. And a lot of that is social. There was a long time in my early 20s when I really wanted to be a particular kind of observant person. And so I'm trying to not use too much insider language to make myself as clear as possible. But some of the spaces that I wanted to be in were people who had kind of grown up together and had a lot of life experience together. And so then kind of trying to break into that as a young adult was challenging. And I did ultimately kind of carve my own way in. And I now am at a place in my life where I really feel very lucky that I have a lot of really good people around me. But to something that Sadia said that I wanted to really share a personal story. When I was in rabbinical school, so I started rabbinical school when I was I'm in my late 30s now. I started rabbinical school in my late 20s. And um, I was having a really, really difficult time for a lot of reasons. It was a very hard time spiritually and accessibility wise. Like there were just lots and lots of pieces to that. And one of the incredible blessings that came to me in this process is that we were working with a particular text that I was really struggling with. And I ended up finding an article about that text by someone who may be known in this community, Rabbi Dr. Julia Watts-Belser. And reading that article was transformative because not only was the article itself important, but really more important than the actual article that I found by Rabbi Watts-Belser was the fact that I found a rabbi who had physical disabilities that I could really imagine myself like, oh, this is something I can do. And it was that moment of like finding connection to someone else because I had felt really isolated in my experience. I mean, my entire life, I'm in the United States and I went to public school my entire life, and I was the only blind student everywhere I went, and that continued through both my undergraduate years and my master's degree and rabbinical school years. And so it was really hard because a lot of what I was experiencing, I was the only one experiencing it. And so it's very hard for me not to be really disconnected in lots of ways and feel really boxed in and really separate from other people and just very, very isolated, spiritually and otherwise. And so one of the ways of navigating that was finding the work and the incredible work of rabbis and other leaders with disabilities that I then connected to and found some kinship. And that also made it a lot easier when I was in community, when I was in spaces that were more inclusive and spaces that were less. And something that I have found in terms of social inclusion that has been really, really helpful for me is, I really feel like, and I'd be interested in what the other panelists think on this as well. I really believe in some ways that being a person with a disability, you really get an opportunity to read people's character from the get-go, right? Because if you are in the world as a visibly disabled person, which I think all three of us are, if I'm not mistaken, if you're in the world as a visibly disabled person, like people are going to have all their reactions and they're going to have lots of different ways of relating. And a lot of that has to do with their own biases and the things that they need to unpack in their own lives. And, you know, but it also kind of gives an opportunity to recognize like a person's character and a person's like whether that person is someone who's a really good-hearted person, someone who wants to connect with people who are different from them. And I just feel really it's a really interesting and paradoxical experience, but I feel in some ways really lucky that because of who I am, it's very easy. Like if you wanna hang out with me, you know, like the people who are like, I don't know, I'm uncomfortable around disability, they tend to kind of leave my circle pretty quick, you know? So it ends up being that you find really, really strong and really, really good people to be around. And I actually think it's an important piece. But I also do want to say that there has been a lot of challenge around social access, and I'll be honest, that has gotten far better the older I've gotten. When I was a teenager, and especially finishing high school, that's really extraordinarily challenging. And I am very grateful to not be in that time anymore. And things do get better. Things really have gotten a lot better. And I want to just offer that, but I also want to name that that's not true for everyone. And that I know many of people that I encounter in my work every day and that I encounter socially who have disabilities who are very isolated. And so something that I really care about as a religious leader and somebody who really cares about people is finding ways to help people feel connected to community.
Hmm. Well, I appreciate like your honest experience that, it's not all been easy. And I'm so happy to hear that, you have found good social community and spiritual community now. And all of you seem like very positive and kind of outgoing people. So, yeah, I do want to recognize in general, I think there's a lot of social isolation nowadays, and it's not always easy for anybody, but this might be another barrier. So, I wanted to ask after you mentioned that, Rabbi Lauren, about mentors and networks. Do any of you recommend or have participated in a mentoring program, either as a young adult or later, and or an adult kind of network, like a religious kind of network for adults or young adults? Do any of these exist in, I guess, especially the religious um, context, like a Jewish young adults group or a mentoring program for people coming into, their adult life, something. And same for, Muslim and Christian, of course.
For me, one of my goals is to give back to the center that gave so much to me. I have recently been approved to be on the board of directors there, and most of the people that are in that board are young adults. Some have children with disabilities. I am really the only one that actually has a disability that is on that board. But, um, and also I know all the history of the agency that is celebrating, I believe, 55 years. Um, and I was recently put in their newsletter as someone who overcame adversity and disability in a young life because I was uh, 10 months old when I arrived at that center. So, one of my goals is to give some time to those children who are dealing with their disability now, growing up, especially for their parents, because it is a very scary thing to see that your child is going through a disability and not knowing what the future holds for that particular child and for them. When I was diagnosed with cerebral palsy, it was not well known. So there was not a lot of resources out there that were there to help not only me, but my parents. My parents were from descent from Mexico and they did not speak English. So imagine navigating through so many doctors and uh, screenings, scans. I received so many negative uh, diagnoses. Oh, he will not talk. He will never walk. His mind will never develop. He won't live to be 10. So many of these things that was shared with my parents, they were already afraid to begin with. So yes, giving positive uh, future outlooks through mentoring uh, young adults, young children, either as parents of individuals with a disability, whatever it may be, um, is important because they need to know that yes, the road ahead will be hard, but there is silver lining in that cloud. There are wonderful positive things out there. So many resources nowadays that were not available many years ago. Uh, anyway, that's something that I really strive to do is to serve as a mentor, to be able to share my story and let them know that the journey is just beginning and it's going to be a positive journey as long as they have uh, positivity in their own life and are able to look at things not as a barrier, but as an opportunity to overcome it.
So you're hoping to be a mentor for younger
Absolutely.
people. right.
I've received many mentors in my life, so it's time for me to give back.
That's wonderful. And Sadia and Rabbi Lauren, have you been part of any like young adult groups or adult groups that are Jewish or Muslim or know of any type of network or mentoring, that kind of programs?
Um, Mentorship can come through many different ways. When you're young, you're not necessarily involved under an organization. So I think my first mentors were my parents. And as I grew up, I was involved in youth Muslim camps. So the one in charge was the imam and his wife. So they were my mentors automatically, not only because they were leaders, but because they were also parents of a child with a disability. Um, they just gave me the freedom to ask any questions that I had, and I had no filter when asking. Um, and then when I grew up and went into university, I had sincere elder mentors from the Muslim community in Hong Kong guide me on how to like do do activities under the Muslim Student Association. So we were starting this up. There was no system established. We were creating a system by consulting elders within the local Hong Kong Muslim community. As I graduated, um, I realized that not all leaders understand disability. So I did go through a period of isolation, despite being very active early on in my childhood. And I was also becoming a writer at that stage. So the mentorship that I found was through the online international Muslim community, like through Sister Juhi, under Mohsin, um, all the way in America, even though I'm in Hong Kong, or just different places in the Muslim community that were not from my own community because they had more exposure when it comes to understanding disability or talking about disability, or they went through the same educational system as I did because I went to an international school. So my upbringing was very different from most in the Muslim community over here. So I kind of felt lost. And I went through a stage where I joined a fellowship within the Hong Kong community, Disability Social Justice Fellowship. Even though it was a secular setting, but my Islam was embraced. Like I could talk about Islam. I could talk about disability openly as part of inclusion. So I didn't feel like I had to hide my identity. So I had a mentor through that experience. So I did not limit as to where I found mentorship. It comes through many different forms and avenues and different stages in your life. And I would say that sometimes the best form of mentorship can be found outside of your local community. Yeah.
Sorry about that. I thought I had unmuted. Apologies.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, in terms of mentorship, I would agree with Sadia that sometimes the best mentors can be found outside of your local community. And that was certainly my experience. Growing up, I would agree that with also that my first mentors were my parents, in lots of ways. And I am extraordinarily grateful for that. In terms of formal mentorship, that has been less a part of my life when I was a kid and a young adult. But it's something that I've really been trying to cultivate because there have been so many people who have given so much to me that I would like to be able to give back. And I try to do that in every way that I can, working with people who are looking for disability affirming resources, really working with people who want to create more accessibility in the Jewish world, really trying to mentor people really in an organic way, but also with my students, trying to be a source of support, the kind of support that I didn't always have. And I think it's something that we could really stand to cultivate more, both in the wider society and also in the Jewish community specifically, And I think that that's getting better. I mean, I have had the incredible privilege of having dear friends who became mentors in some ways to me who are no longer with us, and I treasure their memories. And they were very um, prized disability activists here in America, particularly Judy Heumann, may her memory be a blessing. Phil Grossman, may her memory be a blessing. And those folks in particular really were extraordinarily important. And as well as my friend Rhonda, who I'm so embarrassed, I'm so blanking on her last name right now. May her memory be a blessing, who, showed me in a lot of ways what it would be like to be a religious blind woman. And I really treasure all of that. And I try to give as much of that back through the work that I do as I possibly can, not only by being a possibility model, but also by trying to be a resource for folks. Because it's hard, when you are on this path. Luckily, there's so many more resources now, but a lot of it is you kind of have to figure it out as you go along. And I think that that is one of the reasons that disability can feel really scary, as Saul was talking to a bit ago, that disability can feel really, really scary because if you don't have people who've gone before you, or you don't have a sense of community cohesion and belonging, it's really hard to find your own way. So I think that's something that we can do to really support each other and create more communal cohesion is to emphasize the ways in which we can support people in this process and create a real community where people feel like they are contributing and also being supported at the same time. So that's something that I would really love to see in the wider community, but also locally. And I would end by also agreeing that I have been extremely lucky. I have Jewish communities all around the globe that I'm connected to in one way or another. And it's really it's a really beautiful thing to be so interconnected, particularly in these times. It feels really beautiful to know that even if things where I am locally are actually quite good, and we have a lot of really good resources, but it's also really lovely to be able to connect with people all around the world who also are working for disability access and inclusion.
It's wonderful that you're all thinking about um, beyond your, local communities and also connecting to the wider, interfaith communities by participating in this and, also thinking about the future generations. um, because you know, you're the leaders now. So to continue that, I just wanted to uh, go off of what you just said, Rabbi Lauren, about um, what are some of the other needs or things that you think can be improved? Because you had a comment just now that you'd like to see certain things, even developed more in the Jewish community. Like, could there be, specific disability young adult networks, or what kind of needs do you think could be addressed, or in what ways? What should be considered, or what are some things that maybe could be done in the future for all of the religions too?
Yeah, I'll respond really quickly and then I'll turn it over to my co-panelists. That's something that often happens in my experience socially in the Jewish world. And again, I'm in the US, so every space is a little bit different. But I think often people create, opportunities for gathering, which are really lovely, whether it's in the synagogue or outside the synagogue. Often people will do like social events or have specific young adult services or whatever it is. And one of the challenges there is that a lot of those social events, like whether it's a Shabbat dinner, so a Sabbath meal, or whether it's just a, happy hour or something like that, just as a means of bringing people together socially, sometimes there are pieces of those that are less accessible. And if you don't have a really good network going in, I know for myself when I was, going to happy hours in my 20s, and I never enjoyed that scene at all. It's very much not my scene. I'm very much an introvert. But when I was there, Um, it just felt really, really hard to connect as a blind person to just like, find people to be with and connect with. And so really thinking intentionally about like what kind of gatherings are you creating, whether they are for the disability community specifically or for the broader community, and how are we thinking about inclusion in social events? What are the questions that we are asking? Like, is the venue accessible? Is there going to be quiet space available for people? And what are the questions that we aren't yet asking? How do we really widen our tent to bring folks in? So how do we as religious leaders make ourselves available to folks so that they know that there are people that are out there that understand the disability experience that can really, be with them in that and can really support them in finding their place in their religious community?
Well, that's right. There's in person and then there's virtual. So that's a good point to consider all kinds of accessibility, right? Sadia or Saul, do you have any thoughts about, the future innovations or like ideas of, as you're reflecting on your own experience, like what could be improved more for, especially for young adults?
I think for young adults, I would first go back to the leaders. Like, it's the responsibility of all faith-based leaders to not have misconceptions on disability and what their faith says on disability. Because we're going through the double layer of misconceptions. And it's very harmful if a leader has misconceptions on their faith with regards to disability. It puts the pressure on the child with a disability or the parent with a disability to educate the leader when actually it's the leader's responsibility to educate the community on what the faith says on disability and what disability is. So I think that would be the main thing I would advocate for, besides accessibility. There needs to be more awareness, and acknowledgement that stigma does exist, ableism does exist. We shouldn't be in a position where we have to prove that it exists. Like, it's a reality. We cannot grow as a community if we don't acknowledge the reality that people with disabilities and their carers are facing. So the first step would be acknowledging and realizing that there needs to be understanding, there needs to be growth. So, and I would also suggest that community leaders should, especially when there are youth involved, there should be intervention sometimes when the youth are being exclusive towards youth with disabilities. Don't just deny that a problem exists. Disability is not the problem. Exclusion is the problem. So, so I think leaders should, intervene instead of leaving it to the one with a disability who might not be in the position to protect themselves, or they're not meant to advocate for themselves alone. They should have someone there to advocate with them. And it's the leader's responsibility to do that. So I would emphasize that peer intervention is very important so that our youth have the environment to grow because that's their right.
It just one very quick question. In your mosque or in your community, your Muslim community, are there separate groups for different ages, or is it's not that large of a community that they can do that?
We do have like gatherings for children and the youth, but we also have gatherings where everyone is just together at different ages. Like, I remember when I was young and we had youth camps, the elderly would join. And I would love that the elderly would join because they struggle doing physical tasks. So I felt like I was not alone. I mean, I struggle too. So I felt like I could connect with the elderly more than those from my age group. And I loved that. And I felt more motivated to go to the mosque because I could see the elderly, especially from the Chinese Muslim community, go out because it's custom within the Chinese culture to eat at restaurants. And there was a restaurant at the Islamic Center. So then I would see them struggling to go up the stairs just to eat at the restaurant. I was like, oh, I'm not alone struggling. So it was really nice to see that we had we had people from different age groups spending time with each other. But I would say that it would not be that common um, in different racial Muslim backgrounds. Like it was more common in Chinese Muslim communities. So I felt like I belonged there more, even though I'm not Chinese. You know, because the race element also played a part as well.
The intersection, yeah, that's very interesting. So, but not, there wasn't a specific young, like young adults group. There was youth and then some like older people or
There
some,
were there were organizations like Hong Kong Islamic Youth Organization, and there were, but then we would have people from different ages also participate as well.
what age does the youth go up to, would you say?
I think until 20s.
Okay.
Yeah,
And then it's adults after that.
yeah.
Okay. Wonderful. Um, Saul, I'm sorry. Would you like to share anything about the the future needs of and improvements, what you envision could be done?
I think the biggest thing people can do is to educate themselves on the variety of disabilities that exist. Uh, More and more time, I see people that uh, want to learn about what it is that this individual may be dealing with, but they're afraid to ask. Uh, I get this a lot from, especially little kids. You know, little kids, they don't hold back. They come right to you and they say, "Why are you in that chair?" Whereas adults always fear that they're saying something that will offend you. Where a little child, they don't care. I mean, they're just going to ask. And oftentimes the parents then come up and say, "Please, you're bothering him. Don't ask those things." And I always respond, "No, let him ask. Let her ask. This is the only way they're going to learn." And the more children, young adults growing up learn about the fact that we're not so different from anyone else, we're just like everyone. We just maybe we move a little slower. Maybe we don't do things in the same way that most people do, but we get the job done eventually. So I always say educating oneself with as much information uh, that is possible. That's my advice to anyone that's dealing with a disability. Maybe they have a child with one, a family member, or maybe in the workplace. Here at my job, nobody really sees my wheelchair because I'm all over the place. They have grown accustomed to the fact that I don't need any special attention. And that's one thing that I try to always get across to people is that if I need help, I will ask for it. And so nobody really comes up and says, "Do you need help?" They let me struggle with what I'm doing until I come forward and say, "You know what? I could use some help now." And that's only from years of working with me and seeing what my capabilities are. Now, obviously, as you grow older, these two young ladies here are young, quite a bit younger than me. But when I was younger, I would never ask for help because I wanted to do things myself and I wanted to be accepted like anyone else. Now, as I'm older, if I want to do something that's going to take a little bit more effort, sure, I'll ask, "Hey, can you help me do that? Can you reach that for me on the floor?" Because You never know, I might spill into the floor and where somebody else can easily pick it up. So those are things that you learn through life, that it's okay to ask for help now, where before I did not want to do that.
Okay, so education, more
Yes,
education
absolutely.
at all stages, really any stage.
Yes,
And yeah, that's a really interesting insight you had about maybe different stages, what people feel comfortable with, either
yes,
either speaking up. You said children are very comfortable, adults are not always.
exactly.
And then I don't, you mentioned about as a disabled person asking for help. So, yeah, these are future things that we can maybe discuss. I think those are really interesting issues. I wanted to go to Rabbi Lauren because she has to leave, so she wanted to add something. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. I wanted to just say something in complete agreement with what Sadia said just a moment ago, which is that I firmly believe that it is the religious leaders' responsibility and anyone in authority to educate themselves about what the tradition has to say about disability. Now, in when I say what the tradition has to say about disability in the Jewish tradition, it's a multivocal tradition. There's a lot of different things that can be said, and I'm happy to talk with folks offline about that. But there's a lot of incredibly positive and life-affirming teachings in the Jewish tradition about disability, including the fact that many of our biblical ancestors had disabilities, including the fact that Moses, our teacher, had a disability, and like lots of pieces there. Um, and one of the ways I think we can get to that education is to ensure that it is a part of the curriculum that religious leaders have to go through as part of their official ordination, whether that's in rabbinical or cantorial school. And I also think that it's critically important because people really look to their religious leaders for guidance in lots of different ways. And so having a positive understanding of disability and also a very life affirming understanding of disability is very important. And also to what Sadia said that I really want to agree with wholeheartedly. We are not, ableism is a reality of our lives that is unfortunately here. We can't face it unless we name it. And I think it's really, really important. Many of us were basically on our own and had to deal with a lot of stuff on our own. And I don't believe it's meant to be that way. I'm very influenced by people who argue that interdependence is extremely important, that, we can't actually navigate the reality of ableism and the reality of the ways that that affects people's lives if we're not able to name it. And so when you have religious leaders able to say, you know, yes, ableism exists in the world and ableism is found in our own community. What can we do as a community to address that in a productive way? And what can we do as a community to navigate it? I think that in and of itself is going to make it easier for young adults and everyone really to find their home in community when they know that their religious community is taking their life experience seriously. I think that's extraordinarily important, and we all are going to make mistakes. We all have an opportunity to repair those mistakes, but we can't address the impact of ableism and the realities that exist for people with disabilities in all kinds of ways if we can't talk about them openly and directly. It's really critically important. And I'm grateful that that is becoming more and more true in my community, but I still think we have a long way to go.
Great. Well, I will pass now to Tom. Thank you all so much. That was a really, really excellent discussion. So, Tom, I'll pass it to you.
Okay. I am reminded of the story in the Bible in John about the person who was blind, and they asked Jesus as they were walking, "Who caused this?" He said, "Neither." That he said that so God's works can be made known in their life, and I really think God's work is really being made known through Sadia, Lauren, and Saul. He's working in your lives, and we appreciate you sharing with us and sharing what's important, sharing a little bit about your faith as well. And thank you all for what you do and the work that you're doing in your own community and in your worlds. So again, thank you for being here and also sharing personal things with us too. I want to point you to Rabbi Lauren's website if you're not, and then Satya's website as well, and uh, the two books that Satya has out right now. Uh, Rabbi Lauren has many different resources on her website as well. I encourage you to take a look at that. Um, in closing, this has been recorded, and so it will be shared with everybody who registered. Also, next week on April 17th, since this is Autism Month, we will have Autism in Eastern Religions. So that would be an interesting discussion. We'll have representatives from the Buddhist and the Sikh faiths, and they'll be talking to us about how autism is prevalent in their faith and what's being done to serve that population. So until then, we thank you all for your participation. Thank you for making this a delightful and fascinating discussion. Um, so hopefully we'll see you next week and we'll keep in touch with the good work that all of you are doing. God bless you all.
God bless you. Thank you.
God bless you.